friends, I want to talk for a few minutes with the people of the United States about banking. To talk with the comparatively few who understand the mechanics of banking, but more particularly with the overwhelming majority of you who use banks for the making of deposits and the drawing of checks. I want to tell you what has been done in the last few days and why it was done and what the next steps are going to be. I recognize that the many proclamations from state capitals and from Washington, the legislation, the Treasury regulations, and so forth, couched for the most part in banking and legal terms, ought to be explained for the benefit of the average citizen. I owe this in particular.
Welcome back to the Junius Maltby channel. We're going to take a walk through some of the United States history as far as acts and executive orders are concerning precious metals, gold and silver. Not all of the acts and not all of the executive orders are here today. However, we're going to discuss some of the bigger ones, and many of these have since expired or been eliminated by presidents at some point during the time they were enacted and today. A lot of executive orders were struck down by Ronald Reagan. Some were struck down by Gerald Ford. Others were changed here and there in between and revised at certain times. But we're going to look at just the role government has played in trying to manage these archaic and barbarous, someday worthless relics. So let's look at how government treats precious metals and why they place so much importance on managing and corralling our behavior as citizens in transacting with these metals. I think the best place to start would be in the somewhat beginning, the foundation of the country. So let's look at the Coinage Act of 1792. The Coinage Act, or the Mint Act, passed by the United States Congress on April 2nd, 1792. It created the United States dollar as the country's standard unit of money, established the United States Mint, and regulated the coinage of the United States. The long title of the legislation is an act establishing a mint and regulating the coins of the United States. This act established the silver dollar as the unit of money in the United States, declared it to be lawful tender, and created a decimal system for U.S. currency. Here's a slide showing the authorization. The act authorized production of the following coins. Here's the name of the coins on the left, their denominations in dollars, and the weight of precious metals they were to contain. There you can see the eagle as a $10 piece, the half eagle at $5, the quarter eagle at $2.50, all of which were containing standard gold. The $20 gold piece, known as the double eagle, would come later in U.S. history, holding twice the gold of the $10 eagle you see there. And there you can see the dollar, half dollar, quarter, dime, and half dime, today referred to as a nickel, all containing standard silver and the weights associated with those coins. In May of 1792, an act was passed to provide for a copper coinage, and that was signed into law by President George Washington, which resulted in the birth of the copper cent. And the coins were specified to have the following markings. On one side, there was to be an impression emblematic of liberty with the inscription Liberty and the year of the coinage. The reverse side of each of the gold and silver coins was to have the figure or representation of an eagle with the inscription United States of America. The reverse of the copper coins was to have an inscription expressing the denomination. And my favorite part of this act, Section 19, established a penalty of death for debasing the gold or silver coins authorized by the act, or embezzlement of the metals for those coins by officers or employees of the mint. This section of the act apparently remains in effect and would, in theory, continue to apply in the case of any of the gold or silver coins which shall be struck or coined at the said mint. The Coinage Act evolved over time, and there's been several of them. But now let's take a look at Specie Payment Resumption Act. The Specie Payment Resumption Act of January 14, 1875 was a law in the United States that restored the nation to the gold standard through the redemption of previously unbacked United States notes and reversed inflationary government policies promoted directly after the American Civil War. The decision further contracted the nation's money supply and was seen by critics as an exacerbating factor of the so-called Long Depression, which struck in 1873. As many of you are familiar with, during the Civil War, they issued the greenback, which we'll hear about here in a moment. In 1861, seeking to raise revenue for the American Civil War effort without exhausting its reserves of gold and silver, the United States federal government suspended specie payments, or the payments made in gold and silver in redemption of currency notes. Early in 1862, the United States issued legal tender notes called greenbacks. By war's end, a total of $431 million in greenbacks had been issued, and authorization had been given for another $50 million in small denominations known as fractional currency or shinplasters. The issuance of greenbacks caused inflation during the period. If you've ever listened to the Federal War on Gold reading I have done on this channel, you'll hear about this time period as well as the ruling titled Hepburn versus Griswold, in which there was controversy regarding greenbacks and their exchangeability for gold as it related to private agreements and contracts between people. So I'd encourage you to, after this video, if you're interested in this type of thing, listen to the Federal War on Gold reading. Immediately after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, there were large capital inflows into the United States and a general improvement in the export-to-import ratio, since the export-dominant South was reintegrated with the North. The United States Treasury, however, had increased its cash balance through the summer of 1873 by selling gold for $14 million. National banks also increased issuance of national banknotes by $44 million. The Bland Alison Act. The Bland Alison Act, also referred to as the Grand Bland Plan of 1878, was an act of the United States Congress requiring the U.S. Treasury to buy a certain amount of silver and put it into circulation as silver dollars. Though the bill was vetoed by President Rutherford B. Hayes, the Congress overrode Hayes' veto on February 28, 1878, to enact the law. Some background: the 5-year depression following the Panic of 1873 caused cheap money advocates, led by Representative Richard P. Bland, a Democrat of Missouri, to join with silver-producing interests in urging a return to bimetallism, the use of both silver and gold as a standard. Coupled with Senator William B. Allison of Iowa, they agreed to a proposal that allowed silver to be purchased at market rates, metals to be minted into silver dollars, and required the U.S. Treasury to purchase between $2 million and $4 million of silver each month from Western mines. President Rutherford B. Hayes, who held interests in industrials and banking, vetoed the measure, which was overturned by Congress. As a result, the Hayes administration purchased the limited amount of silver each month. This act helped restore bimetallism, with gold and silver both supporting the currency. However, gold remained heavily favored over silver, paving way for the gold standard. This brings us to the free silver movement discussion. The free silver movement of the late 19th century advocated the unlimited coinage of silver, which would have resulted in inflationary monetary policy. In 1873, Congress had removed the usage of silver dollars from the list of authorized coins under the Coinage Act of 1873. Remember, there's been several Coinage Acts, referred to by opponents as the, quote, crime of 73. Although the Bland Alison Act of 1878 directed the Treasury to purchase silver from the best Western miners, President Grover Cleveland repealed the act in 1893. Advocates of free silver included owners of silver mines in the West, of course, farmers who believed an inclusion of silver would increase crop prices, and debtors who believed would alleviate their debts. Although the free silver movement ended, the debate of inflation and monetary policy continues to this day. Now let's take a look at the Coinage Act of 1873. The Fourth Coinage Act acknowledged the gold standard over silver. Those who advocated for silver labeled this act as the crime of 73. As a result of demonetized silver, gold became the only metallic standard in the United States and became the default standard. The price of gold was more stable than that of silver, largely due to silver discoveries in Nevada and other places in the West. and the price of silver to gold declined from 16 to 1 in 1873 to nearly 30 to 1 by 1893. The term limping bimetallism describes this problem. The U.S. government finally ceded to pressure from the western mining states, and the Bland Alison Act went into effect in 1878, which was replaced by the Sherman Silver Purchase Act of 1890. The law was replaced in 1890 by the similar Sherman Silver Purchase Act, which in turn was repealed by Congress in 1893. These were two instances where the United States attempted to establish bimetallic standards in the long run. Now, that date that you saw earlier, the Bland Alison Act, went into effect 1878. Remember, I've mentioned in the past how the government was forced to purchase large amounts of silver and mint it at that time period. Well, what coin was introduced? Many of you are aware of the Morgan dollar that I carry in my wallet. It's an 1878, heavily worn, 1878, first year issue Morgan dollar. Those early Morgans had very large mint populations due to this time period in which large amounts of silver were being produced and purchased by the federal government as mandated by the Bland Alison Act. Here's a look at some of the reactions and economic impact of this. Western miners and debtors regarded the Bland Alison Act as an insufficient measure to enforce unlimited coinage of silver, but opponents repealed the act and advocated for the gold standard. The effect of the Bland Alison Act was also blunted by the minimal purchase of silver required by the Hayes administration. Although the act was a near turning point for bimetallism, gold continued to be favored over the bimetallism standard. Executive Order 6102. And now is where things get interesting, and we look at perhaps one of America's most horrible presidents when it came to the violations of private property rights and just the overall violations of the free market itself. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, my least favorite president. I won't say too much there because I can get pretty mean when it comes to my discussions of FDR. So Executive Order 6102 is a United States presidential executive order signed on April 5, 1933 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States. The effect of the order, in conjunction with the statute under which it was issued, was to criminalize the possession of monetary gold by any individual, partnership, association, or corporation. There's one of the many flyers that was posted and circulated throughout the country announcing the executive order and requiring U.S. citizens to turn in their gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates. Of course, this was a time of economic turmoil in which they placed blame on the inanimate object and the inanimate metal, gold. As we read through the rationale, the stated reason for the order was that hard times had caused, quote, hoarding of gold, stalling economic growth, and making the Depression worse. The New York Times on April 6, 1933, wrote under the headline, quote, hoarding of gold, that, quote, the executive order issued by the President yesterday amplifies and particularizes his earlier warnings against hoarding. On March 6th, taking advantage of a wartime statute that had not been repealed, he issued Presidential Proclamation 2039 that forbade the hoarding of gold or silver coin or bullion or currency under penalty or $10,000 and or up to 5 to 10 years imprisonment. The main rationale behind the order was actually to remove the constraint on the Federal Reserve, which prevented it from increasing the money supply during the Depression. The Federal Reserve Act, 1913, required 40% gold backing of Federal Reserve notes issued. By the late 1920s, the Federal Reserve had almost hit the limit of allowable credit in the form of Federal Reserve demand notes that would be backed by the gold in its possession. If gold could not be legally owned, then it could not be legally redeemed. If it could not be legally redeemed, then it could not constrain the central bank. So the central bank, which was founded in 1913, was blaming gold for its misdeeds and mishandling of the United States economy, and in blaming gold demanded that all of the gold be turned over to it. As I said, this is where things get quite interesting. The effect of the order: Executive Order 6102 required all persons to deliver on or before May 1st, 1933, all but a small amount of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates owned by them to the Federal Reserve in exchange for $20.67 per troy ounce. Under the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, as amended by the recently passed Emergency Banking Act of March 9, 1933, violation of the order was punishable by fine up to $10,000 or up to 10 years in prison or both. Order 6102 specifically exempted customary use in industry, profession, or art, a provision that covered artists, jewelers, dentists, and sign makers, among others. The order further permitted any person to own up to $100 in gold coins, a face value equivalent to 5 troy ounces of gold, valued at about $6,339 in 2016. The same paragraph also exempted gold coins having recognized special value to collectors of rare and unusual coins. This protected recognized gold coin collections from legal seizure and likely melting. The price of gold from the Treasury for international transactions was thereafter raised to $35 an ounce. The resulting profit that the government realized funded the Exchange Stabilization Fund, established by the Gold Reserve Act in 1934. The regulations prescribed within Executive Order 6102 were modified by Executive Order 6111 of April 20th, 1933, both of which were ultimately revoked or superseded by Executive Order 6260 and 6261 of August 28th, 29th, 1933. Executive Order 6102 also led to the ultra rarity of the 1933 Double Eagle coin. The order caused all gold coin production to cease and all 1933 minted coins to be destroyed. About 20 illegal coins were stolen, leading to a standing United States Secret Service warrant for arrest and confiscation of the coin. A legalized surviving coin sold for over $7.5 million in 2002, making one of the most valuable coins in the world. I want to talk about the prosecutions related to Executive Order 6102. Numerous individuals and companies were prosecuted related to President Roosevelt's Executive Order 6102. The prosecutions took place under subsequent Executive Orders 6111, 6260, and 6261, and the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. There was a need to strengthen Executive Order 6102 as the one prosecution under the order was ruled invalid by federal judge John M. Woolsey on the grounds that the order was signed by the President, not the Secretary of the Treasury, as required. The circumstances of the case were that a New York attorney named Frederick Barber Campbell had one deposit at Chase National Bank of over 5,000 troy ounces of gold, 160 kilograms. When Campbell attempted to withdraw the gold, Chase refused, and Campbell sued Chase. A federal prosecutor then indicted Campbell the following day, September 27, 1933, for failing to surrender his gold. Ultimately, the prosecution of Campbell failed, but the authority of the federal government to seize gold was upheld, and Campbell's gold was confiscated. Imagine the government confiscating 5,000 troy ounces of your gold. Today, that would be over $5 million. The case was cause for the Roosevelt administration to issue a new order under the signature of the Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, Jr. Executive Order 6260, 6261 related to the seizure of gold and the prosecution of gold hoarders. A few months later, Congress passed the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, which ratified President Roosevelt's orders. A new set of Treasury regulations was issued providing civil penalties of confiscation of all gold and imposition of fines equal to double the value of the gold seized. Prosecutions of U.S. citizens and non-U.S. citizens followed the new orders, with a few notable cases. Gus Farber, a diamond and jewelry merchant from San Francisco, was prosecuted for the sale of 13 $20 gold coins without a license. Secret Service agents discovered the sale with the help of the buyer. Farber, his father, and 12 others were arrested in 4 American cities after a sting operation conducted by the United States Secret Service. The arrests took place simultaneously in New York and 3 California cities, San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland. Morris Analek was arrested in New York with $5,000 in U.S. and foreign gold coins. Dan Levin and Edward Friedman of San Jose were arrested with $15,000 in gold. Sam Nankin was arrested in Oakland. In San Francisco, 9 men were arrested on charges of hoarding gold. In all, $24,000 in gold was seized by the Secret Service agents during the operation. David Baraban and his son, Jacob Baraban, owned a refining company. The Barabans' license to deal in unmelted scrap gold was revoked, so the Barabans operated their refining business under a license issued to a Minnie Sarch. The Barabans admitted that Minnie Sarch had nothing to do with the business and that she had obtained the license so that the Barabans could continue to deal in gold. The Barabans had a cigar box full of gold-filled scrap jewelry visible in one of the showcases. Government agents raided the Baraban business and found another hidden box of U.S. and foreign gold coins. The coins were seized, and Baraban was charged with conspiracy to defraud the United States. Louis Rufino was one individual who was indicted on 3 counts purporting to violations of the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, which restricted trade with countries hostile to the United States. Eventually, Rufino appealed the conviction to the Circuit Court of Appeals 9th District in 1940. However, the judgment of the lower courts was upheld based on the President's executive orders and the Gold Reserve Act of 1934. Rufino, a resident of Sutter Creek in California Gold Country, was convicted of possessing 78 ounces of gold and was sentenced to 6 months in jail, paid a $500 fine, and had his gold seized. Foreigners also had gold confiscated and were forced to accept paper money for their gold. The Übersee Finance Corporation, a Swiss banking company, had $1,250,000 in gold coins for business use. The Übersee Finance Corporation entrusted the gold to an American firm for safekeeping, and the Swiss were shocked to find that their gold was confiscated. The Swiss made appeals, but those appeals were denied. They were entitled to paper money, but not their gold. The Swiss company lost 40% of their gold's value if they tried to buy the same amount of gold with the paper money they received in exchange for their confiscated gold. Another type of de facto gold seizure occurred as a result of the various executive orders involving bonds, gold certificates, and private contracts. Private contracts or bonds which were written in terms of gold were to be paid in paper currency instead of gold. This was in spite of the fact that these contracts and bonds all proclaimed that they were payable in gold, and at least one, the 4th Liberty Bond, was a federal instrument. The plaintiffs in all cases received paper money instead of the contract terms gold. The contracts and bonds were written precisely to avoid currency debasement by requiring payment in gold coin. The paper money, which was redeemable in gold, was instead irredeemable based on Nortz v. United States, 294 U.S. Code 317, 1935. The Consolidated Gold Clause cases were Perry v. United States, U.S. v. Bankers Trust Company, Norman v. Baltimore, and Ohio Railroad Company, Nortz v. United States. The Supreme Court upheld all seizures as constitutional, with Justices James Clark McReynolds, Willis Van Devanter, George Sutherland, and Pierce Butler dissenting. The 4 justices were nicknamed the 4 Horsemen by the press, as their conservative views were in opposition to President Roosevelt's New Deal agenda. Those are 4 heroes for you, those guys. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 made gold clauses unenforceable and changed the value of gold from $20.67 an ounce to $35 per ounce, thereby devaluing the U.S. dollar as the dollar was gold-based. This price remained in effect until August 15, 1971, when President Richard Nixon announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold at a fixed value, thus abandoning the gold standard for foreign exchange. The private ownership of gold certificates was legalized in 1964, and they can be openly owned by collectors but are not redeemable in gold. The limitation on gold ownership in the United States was repealed after President Gerald Ford signed a bill to permit United States citizens to purchase, hold, sell, or otherwise deal with gold in the United States or abroad, with an act Congress codified which went into effect December 31st, 1974. Let's look at Executive Order 6814 on August 9, 1934. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt implemented the seizure of all silver situated in the continental United States, with Executive Order 6814 requiring the delivery of all silver to the United States for coinage. Executive Order 6814 closely mirrors Executive Order 6102, which FDR signed on April 5, 1933, quote, forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States, unquote. With some differences. A key difference was that Executive Order 6814, the one we're talking about with silver, excluded the seizure of all silver coins, whether foreign or domestic, while Executive Order 6102 only exempted from seizure certain types of collectible or numismatic gold coins. And here's a quick, closer look at Executive Order 6102. We'll just scan through it quickly and look at some of the highlights of it since we did discuss it quite thoroughly here. I like to look at Section 4 here. It says, upon receipt of gold coin, gold bullion, or gold certificates delivered to it in accordance with Sections 2 or 3, Federal Reserve Bank or member bank will pay therefore an equivalent amount of any other form of coin or currency coined or issued under the laws of the United States. So it's amazing to me that the federal government demanded its citizens turn their gold over to these Federal Reserve thugs. So now look at this. Section 5. Member banks shall deliver all gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates owned by or received by them to the Federal Reserve banks of their respective districts and receive credit or payment therefor. So all the other banks had to hand over the gold the citizens handed into them to the Federal Reserve. Section 7 cracks me up because it shows the benevolence and kindness of our overlords and dictators. Here you read, in cases where the delivery of gold coin, gold bullion, or gold certificates by the owners thereof within the time set forth above will involve extraordinary hardship or difficulty, the Secretary of the Treasury may, in his discretion, extend the time within which such delivery must be made. Applications for such extensions must be made in writing, under oath, addressed to the Secretary of the Treasury, and filed with the Federal Reserve Bank. Each application must state the date to which the extension is desired, the amount and location of the gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates, in respect of which such application is made, and the facts showing extension to be necessary to avoid extraordinary hardship or difficulty. They want to know everything, where it is, why it's so hard for you to get the gold to them, and beg the king's permission to grant you leniency in bringing him your gold. This entire law and time period disgusts me, and if I was alive back then, I can almost assure you I would have been executed for high treason or whatever, because this is the type of thing, I just can't imagine how people stood by and would let such acts take place, such violations against liberty. This is why I can't stand it when people tell me, oh, America's the freest country, it's a free country. We haven't been free for a long time, my friend, and anyone who thinks otherwise is a fool. This time period was merely the hardening of the cement that Lincoln poured to form the foundations and cornerstones of tyranny in this land. Section 8 gave the Secretary of the Treasury, if you read it, as many powers as he needed to enforce this act and these laws in seizing people's gold and coins. And then in the bottom, Section 9 is the ultimate threat for those who willfully violate these executive orders. People should have never even consented to these laws relating to the hoarding, exporting, and earmarking of gold coin, bullion, or currency, and to the transactions in foreign exchange. This is Executive Order 6260, August 28, 1933. Let's just skip down to Section 3 where it says, within 15 days from the date of this order, every person in possession of and every person owning gold coin, gold bullion, or gold certificates shall make under oath and file as hereinafter provided a return to the Secretary of the Treasury containing true and complete information relative thereto, including the name and address of the person making the return, the kind and the amount of such coin, bullion, or certificates held, and the location thereof, if held for another, the capacity in which held, and the person for whom held, together with the post office address of such person and the nature of the transaction requiring the holding of such coin, bullion, or certificates, and a statement explaining why such transaction cannot be carried out by the use of currency other than gold certificates, provided that no returns are required to be filed with respect to, and then it gives you a list of gold bullion, gold coin, gold certificates, rare and unusual coins. Section 4 again puts the Federal Reserve above all other institutions or people here in our great land. It says, no person other than a Federal Reserve Bank shall, after the date of this order, acquire in the United States any gold coin, gold bullion, or gold certificates, except under license, therefore issued pursuant to this executive order, provided that member banks of the Federal Reserve System may accept delivery of such coin, bullion, and certificates for surrender promptly to a Federal Reserve Bank, and provided further that persons requiring gold for use in the industry, profession, or art in which they are regularly engaged may replenish their stocks of gold up to an aggregate amount of $100 worth by acquisitions of gold bullion held under license issued under Section 5B without necessity of obtaining a license for such acquisitions. For being an archaic and barbarous relic, for being worthless and hated by Keynesians, they sure do want a lot of it. And by a lot of it, I mean all of it. No Keynesian and no anti-gold big government advocate can argue away the facts of how they look at, treat, and value gold. They want it more than anybody, and they're willing to kill you for it. The law goes on and on describing the holding of gold coin and further limiting any transactions or holding of gold. You see, gold is harmless to everything and everyone but statists. It's almost like kryptonite to Superman. Gold is to the state what kryptonite is to Superman. It challenges their monopoly over the control of the economy and the issuance of currency, and they hate that. It gives you economic liberty, economic freedom, the ability to resist their evil and hidden inflation taxes. They immediately destroyed and devalued the dollar right after they seized these people's gold. This was a horrible time period, my friends. And this should infuriate any freedom-loving, liberty-minded individual anywhere on the planet. And I hope all of you would stand up and resist this violently if necessary, if it ever came about again. Taking a look at Executive Order 6073, this is a little bit earlier in the same time period. Again, this one, until further order, no individual, partnership, association, or corporation, including any banking institution, shall export or otherwise remove or permit to be withdrawn from the United States or any place subject to the jurisdiction any gold coin, gold bullion, or gold certificates, except in accordance with the regulations prescribed by under the license issued by the Secretary of the Treasury. They didn't want any gold leaving the country. Executive Order 6359 related to gold recovered from natural deposits. So let's say you're panning for gold, sluicing for gold, or you find some gold laying on the ground in the mountains. Section 1, relating to the sale and export of gold recovered from natural deposits is hereby revoked, provided, however, that the Secretary of the Treasury is authorized to sell, in accordance therewith, gold received on consignment for sale on or before the date of this executive order. The United States Mints and Assay Offices are hereby authorized, subject to such regulations as may from time to time be prescribed by the Secretary of the Treasury, to receive on consignment gold which the Mint or Assay Office to which the gold is delivered is satisfied has been recovered from natural deposits in the United States or any place subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Following 1933, we came into January 30th, 1934, where we see the Gold Reserve Act, which required that all gold and gold certificates held by the Federal Reserve be surrendered and vested in the sole title of the United States Department of the Treasury. The Gold Reserve Act outlawed most private possession of gold, forcing individuals to sell it to the Treasury, after which it was stored in the United States Bullion Depository at Fort Knox and other locations. The act also changed the nominal price of gold from $20.67 per ounce to $35 an ounce, as we earlier discussed. This price change incentivized foreign investors to export their gold to the United States, while simultaneously devaluing the U.S. dollar in an attempt to spark inflation. The increase in gold reserves due to the price change, as well as the confiscation clause, resulted in a large accumulation of gold in the Federal Reserve and U.S. Treasury. Skipping ahead, we read a year earlier in 1933, Executive Order 6102 had made it a criminal offense for U.S. citizens to own or trade gold anywhere in the world, with exceptions for some jewelry and collector's coins. These prohibitions were relaxed starting in 1964. Gold certificates were again allowed for private investors on April 24, 1964, although the obligation to pay the certificate holder on demand in gold specie would not be honored. By 1975, Americans could again freely own and trade gold. Executive Order 11110 was issued by U.S. President John F. Kennedy on June 4, 1963. This executive order amended Executive Order 10289, dated September 17, 1951, by delegating to the Secretary of the Treasury the President's authority to issue silver certificates under the Thomas Amendment of the Agricultural Adjustment Act, as amended by the Gold Reserve Act. The order allowed the Secretary to issue silver certificates, if any were needed, during the transition period under President Kennedy's plan to eliminate silver certificates and use Federal Reserve notes. On November 28, 1961, President Kennedy halted sales of silver by the Treasury Department. Increasing demand for silver as an industrial metal had led to an increase in the market price of silver above the United States government's fixed price. This led to a decline in the government's excess silver reserves by over 80% during 1961. Kennedy also called upon Congress to phase out silver certificates in favor of Federal Reserve notes, which, according to the Associated Press at the time, were still backed by gold. Kennedy repeated his calls for Congress to act on several occasions, including his 1963 economic report, where he wrote, "I again urge revision in our silver policy to reflect the status of silver as a metal for which there is an expanding industrial demand. Except for its use in coins, silver serves no useful monetary function. In 1961, at my direction, sales of silver were suspended by the Secretary of the Treasury. As further steps, I recommend repeal of those acts that oblige the Treasury to support the price of silver and repeal of the special 50% tax on transfers of interest in silver and authorization for the Federal Reserve System to issue notes in denominations of $1 so as to make possible the gradual withdrawal of silver certificates from circulation and the use of the silver thus released for coinage purposes. I urge the Congress to take prompt action on these recommended changes." Public Law 8836. The House of Representatives took up the President's request early in 1963 and passed H.R. 5389 on April 10, 1963 by a vote of 251 to 122. The Senate passed the bill on May 23 by a vote of 68 to 10. Kennedy signed the bill into law on June 4, 1963, and on the same day signed an Executive Order 11110 authorizing the Treasury Secretary to continue printing silver certificates during the transition period. The Act, which became Public Law 8836, repealed the Silver Purchase Act of 1934 and related laws, repealed the tax on silver transfers, and authorized the Federal Reserve to issue $1 and $2 bills in addition to the notes they were already issuing. The Silver Purchase Act had authorized and required the Secretary of the Treasury to buy silver and issue silver certificates. With its repeal, the President needed to delegate to the Treasury Secretary the President's own authority under the Agricultural Adjustment Act. We took a quick summarized walk through some of the U.S. acts and executive orders that involve precious metals. Of course, there are more of them. But as you can see, the United States government, politicians, bankers, and the elite have spent considerable time and efforts and energy over the course of our history in managing and controlling who has the metal, who owns the gold and silver, and where it is, and how it is accounted for. It should be transparent to anyone that this is done because these metals hold true value and will always be real money. And whoever holds them holds the power, holds the reins and the monopoly over currency, money, and the exchange of all the above. This conversation just once again reaffirms why it is important for you and I to not only hold these precious metals, but to defend the right to holding them forever. Thanks for being part of the Junius Maltby channel. I urge you to continue to explore these concepts, the history of gold and silver here in the United States and abroad, in your home countries, wherever they are, and to always fight to defend your right to own precious metals and to transact in them freely without the encroachment of statists.
The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. Now, what is this action, which is very technical, what does it mean for you? Let me lay to rest the bugaboo of what is called devaluation. If you want to buy a foreign car or take a trip abroad, market conditions may cause your dollar to buy slightly less. But if you are among the overwhelming majority of Americans who buy American-made products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today. The effect of this action, in other words, will be to stabilize the dollar.